And then I think this personal piece of just having knowing that the path you're on is the right path and finding that depth of resilience.
Purposely Podcast, amplifying the stories of people who are making a positive difference to society and the environment. People inspired by purpose. Here's your host, Mark Longbottom.
A really warm welcome to Purposely with Laurence Marshbaum, a returning guest of the show. Laurence is the founder of 10 by 10 Philanthropy, a volunteer movement empowering a new generation of giving. He's also founder of Community Capital, a social impact asset manager, which aligns investment in private markets with community-based outcomes. Laurence is a seasoned portfolio manager and investment guru who has aligned his knowledge and understanding of investment with purpose and a desire to create a better world. Really enjoyed my conversation with him. Before we jump into the show, whatever platform you're on, whether it's Spotify, Apple, can I just ask you to hit follow? It really helps me get the message out there and it'll ensure that those episodes drop into your inbox. Enjoy.
This episode of Purposely was brought to you by Benevity, the all-in-one software solution that benefits employees, customers, non-profits, and society.
Let's get back to the show. Laurence Marshbaum, welcome back to Purposely.
Great to be back. How many repeat customers have you had?
You're among a very few. So a select group of people allowed back on. Absolutely.
Honored to be back.
You're now the CEO or the founder of Community Capital. Tell us about its mission and purpose.
Thanks. I've got to give a shout out as co-founder with Barrenjoey. The Community Capital was created as a unique fund management company that's been set up to achieve two outcomes. One, to deliver strong risk-adjusted returns to our investors. And second, to really drive a positive social impact and contribution back into community through the grant-making strategy that we have that contributes back to Australian society.
Wonderful. And started in December 2022. Tell us a bit about the idea for the fund and how it got off the ground.
Sure. Well, I guess I've seen the successful launch of some similar funds in Australia. You may be familiar with Future Generation, which was established by Jeff Wilson Asset Management, originally big fans of, and then Hearts and Minds, which is another fund that was established by Guy Fowler and Matthew Grounds, who are now at Barrenjoey and formerly with UBS. And those funds both were established in Australia. They're multi-manager funds where fund managers get capacity in their funds on a fee-free basis. And then investors invest into the fund, and then that fund distributes a significant portion of its fee revenue, the majority of its fee revenue, to organisations that work in the community. The other two funds support Australian charities. One's historically more focused on medical research. The other has been in mental health and other range of societal issues. So I'd seen those two funds executed, and I thought it was a unique model to drive ongoing funding to the sector. But I had my own little sort of take on it, obviously having had 10 years of experience in growing 10 by 10 and seeing and really feeling that early stage social purpose organizations in this country were drastically underfunded and lacked multi-year funding revenue and support. And the other thing that I had seen was the other problem I was trying to solve was that as an allocator, because my 10 by 10 was always my side hustle, I was an allocator, sat as the senior portfolio manager in one of Australia's very large superannuation funds. I'd seen this huge shift of capital towards socially responsible investing, but I felt like a lot of the products that were being sold to me weren't actually driving impact at a societal level in the communities where our members lived. And when I reflected on those members of the 2 million plus members that I represented in Australian Retirement Trust at the time and other super funds, I thought that it would be great to try and create a fund that both drove great financial returns and then also impacted the community in Australia. So that was where the genesis of the idea came from. And so different to Hearts and Minds and Future Gen, our customers are all large superannuation funds or, universities, endowments, foundations. And the impact we make is focused on early stage social purpose organizations as opposed to more established ones.
Yeah. And so a founding investment from your then current employer, like Australian Retirement Fund, you started with them first. So how quickly, give us a feel for how quickly it went from idea to something down on paper to actually doing.
Yeah, sure. Well, these things never happen easily. And so, yes, to secure a cornerstone commitment from the Australian Retirement Trust, which is the second biggest superannuation fund in Australia at the moment, obviously was not an easy task. I obviously had the benefit of having, worked there for many years. But I think, it was probably from the idea genesis execution. Like when the idea first came into my head to when I probably executed, I'd say it was 2 years.
And absolutely 100% correct around the challenge for purpose, social enterprises, charities is around sustainable sources of income. And this innovative way of creating those sources of income and enable those organizations to be innovative, right? And to approach, social good, environmental good in an innovative way, or take risks for what they do. Like all that, funds are such an important part because they often present barriers, but they can also fuel missions.
100%. And when I looked at from 10 years experience of doing this work with 10 by 10, what I came to realize is that I think we've got a very significant problem in this country, and it's as follows. It's the early stage social purpose organizations that are sub $1 million in revenue really lack access to funding and capital to help them grow. They struggle to get funding from the large philanthropic foundations. And similarly, it's hard for them to run around hand in hand, raising $5,000 here, $10,000 there to sustain their work. We wouldn't limit or constrain our for-profit early stage businesses with that constraint. So why are we limiting our social businesses with the same constraint? And when I thought about the incredible people and talent we've been able to identify, at 10 by 10 over 10 years, my view and belief still to this day is that the solution to many of the most pressing social problems that we face in society is solved by the most brilliant, young, innovative people within it. They design the solutions to the social problems that can then be grown, scaled, and have an impact really amplified. And so my vision was to support them in their work with multi-year funding to help them grow. And that's the vision of what this fund will hope to achieve. And I hope that in 5-10 years, we can look back and say we've backed a number of them, really great social entrepreneurs and great success stories in the Australian social sector.
Yeah, because you promise strong, you talk about strong investment returns as well as community impact. Those investing in the fund, they're not seeing this as a donation, right? This is a commercial activity for them. They want a return. Tell us about the sort of, early stages of it and the ones that you've got over the line, those who've joined the fund and how the process works. Like a little bit about the detail would be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the challenge for an investor in Australia, for an institutional investor, is that you always have to be acting in your members' best financial interest. And that means that returns that you generate shouldn't be perceived to be concessionary in that you could earn an equal or better return to investing in this investment than any other investment. And that's really been a high bar and a challenge for many allocators to allocate to investments that have a strong social impact. This perception that some of them may be concessionary in the types of returns that they provide to the end investor. So in order to tackle that challenge, the way I established the fund was I set up a fund. It's a fund-of-fund structure. So we invest into a number of other funds. And those funds all provide us capacity into their funds on a fee-free basis. So what that means is that our investors are achieving access to these funds at a cost that's lower than what they could achieve themselves. And what that means for the end investor is that that's purely on a financial basis, a better end outcome than it would be even if the fund had no social impact, right? So extra social impact, the investors are already getting a fantastic return. And so that's the way in which we structured this fund, with the generosity of the number of the underlying fund managers that have agreed to participate, providing their capacity in the funds on a fee-free basis. We're able to structure a fee, which then goes back into the community, that's still below the cost of what it would be to invest in these funds directly, if these investors were to invest in these funds directly.
Wonderful. And what are the numbers looking like?
Well, it's very early days, but the fund is targeting 10 to 12% growth, so 9 to 11% net over the fund life. Its focus is on a private credit strategy. So what that means to those people not as familiar with this terminology, is really investing in funds that are providing loans to companies right across the world. And that's really also taking advantage of what's been a very strong pullback from banks right around the world. You've seen a large pullback in the amount of bank lending. And so therefore, a lot of these funds step into that wide space that the banks historically operated in. It's also important to say that the fund does have screens. So we screen out any oil and gas investments and other, and we adhere to some of the best practice in terms of what impact in terms of exclusions. But the social impact's really made through, the grants we make back into the community. And so, it's early days. Over the life of this fund, we'd anticipate it to generate the types of returns we're targeting. The only other thing to say is that the market's definitely come our way. As a result of, I did this job for many years. And one of the things that I used to allocate to a number of different strategies, and whichever fund manager would come through my door, they would always tell me it is the best possible time for their strategy. No matter what they would be investing in, they'd be convinced that this was the best possible time. So not to be biased by the same type of approach, by that trap, but it is a very good time because rates have gone up, spreads are wider, and so therefore for the investors, it's an attractive time to be investing in private credit, which is perhaps why I've also been successful in raising quite a lot of money.
And launching this, did you have to fork out your own cash? And I know you had some philanthropic partners right from the very beginning. I'm thinking the Signia, Legal Super, Mindero. Like, what does the sort of startup look like in terms of getting this off the ground? Was it intensive in terms of capital, time spent? Were you doing it on the side of the desk in your spare time?
Yeah, well, there was many steps for this to happen. I think I'm fortunate that I came from an institutional background, and I'd really like to call out Australian Retirement Trust and the leadership team there, who really allowed me, to work on this for a number of months to bring it to life whilst I was employed there. And so that definitely de-risked it for me in terms of, having to take time out and really do this. So I was able to, with their support, help, consider bringing this fund to life. And it was really with their backing and their foundation commitment that the fund was able to come to fruition. But then also, this isn't just me, it's a joint venture between myself and Barrenjoey, the Australian financial services firm. And so with Barrenjoey's backing and name to this, obviously it brought the institutional credibility and a lot of the things that are needed to bring a fund to market. We've raised close to $500 million Australian. So that's not possible without a very strong backing and team there. And so, I was able to leverage Barrenjoey's operating capability in terms of legal, tax, accounting, finance, which certainly helped bring the fund to life as well. So, I was in a little bit of a fortunate position relative to other social entrepreneurs that may be coming from a standing start, that I was able to leverage the support of two very important institutional partners to bring the fund to life.
Mm. And we touched on before 10 by 10 philanthropy, but you've had a long and successful career in sort of investment, just call it that broadly. And in 2013, you were the founder of 10 by 10, and it's really, I describe it as a movement. I don't know if you call it that, but a fundraising movement that, has been phenomenally successful. So 14 cities, 7 countries, over 5 million raised, if I've got my numbers right. And that's a whole lot of volunteer power, a lot of people who are running these events and raising money for grassroots sort of startup charities, if you like. But you've done a phenomenal job of connecting young people to the joy of giving. And I know I've had involvement. I've been to the event in Auckland a number of years, and you're sort of introducing philanthropy and a joy of giving to a lot of people who it's for the first time. But did that really wake you up to the idea that you wanted to connect your professional life, what you did on an everyday basis, to purpose? Was that front of mind? Like, once you'd seen some stuff, you couldn't look back almost?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So I'd like to, we're at 6 million now, believe it or not, in terms of funds raised. We just had our 10-year anniversary in Sydney last month, which was fantastic. It was over 400 people at the New Sydney Modern celebrating that. And the event raised over 200 grand for 3 amazing early stage social purpose organizations here in Sydney. And it was this amazing moment where I was like sort of coming down the escalator and seeing all these people in the room that were, to be honest, way cooler and far more trendy than me. And I was like, this thing's been successful. So it was great reflecting what 10 by 10's been able to achieve and the fact that it can still go on to inspire and engage a new generation in giving is its purpose, and continue to identify, some of the amazing social purpose organizations that hopefully will be able to support also at community capital. So yeah, I'm very proud of what we've been able to achieve there. And in terms of like how, but I always did, you're right, call it my side hustle, right? Because the whole time I built up 10 by 10, with the support of an amazing team and board and executive, I had a full-time job, which was quite demanding. But I'd say like, I always thought, I was always very socially driven, but I always thought like I would take this path where I would like go into finance, make loads of money, retire, and then like give it all away. That was like what I had some role models that early on in my life that I'd seen take that path. And I thought that was the path that I would go on. But when I founded 10 by 10 in 2013, and then it became successful in its own right, it sort of dawned on me like, wow, I can actually do this while I'm living, and it's so much richer. It's like, what an amazing life that every day that you can embed your life as part of this purpose, right? Like, and that was when it was like, this incredible. But I never ever really thought that I would be able to bring the two worlds together, because 10 by 10 is really operating at a different scale to what I was doing, in my day job. But over time, and then I guess I saw this evolution of capital shifting towards more socially responsible investing, and that's where I saw the opportunity to bring the two together. So it was almost opportunistic in that sense, and it does feel great to be doing the two in alignment now, but I wouldn't say that was always the case. But yeah, I feel like just incredibly grateful that I'm able to do this every day now, and that I've been able to bring the two worlds together is the dream.
Yeah. And 10 by 10, one thing that struck me is the fact that it's endured, right? You've created this community of people and you keep getting fresh blood, if you like, new committee members, people. But how do you think it's endured? Like, what did you do in that founder stage and also in the scaling of it, for it to be sticky? Because that's really the success of it, I think, is the fact that it's still around and still raising money for good causes.
I'd say maybe there's two things. I'd say one of the things I'd say is that obviously young people and young professionals want to do good. They want to give back. They want to live lives of purpose and meaning, but they all lack the time, the knowledge, and the infrastructure to do so in a way that's meaningful to them. So what we're able to do is create this really good way for young people to engage in giving. And so I think, and the fact that you come on a committee, you serve for 2 months, that's your contribution. I mean, I think it's something that's doable for a lot of young people and young professionals and professionals as well. So I think that part of it is engaging. The other thing I'd say is that the social contract that exists between friends is very powerful. And so what 10 by 10 is able to do, because the way it works for the people who are listening, is that 10 people invite 10 friends to each give $100. So the 10 people in the committee are responsible for going to the community and bringing their 10 people, right? And that social contract that exists between that person and their 10 friends is very powerful. And it's something that can be leveraged to create real momentum and growth. And so I'd say that's what we've been successful in doing, right? Organizing an event and inviting people and the same people and over again, it's hard to get that retention rate, right? But to leverage that social contract between the committee members and the people that are attending is very powerful. And I think that's what we've been able to do successfully, that ensures that we're getting so many great people coming through, and the movement's been able to continue to grow and scale and still, be a powerful force here in the community, 10 years since it was first created.
Yeah, wonderful. And just reflecting on what you said a bit earlier around what you thought your life path would be, which would be to, successful career, make a lot of money, and then give it away or become a philanthropist. What's come along the journey that's changed the way you think about your career and your life and what you're doing when you are living, that's kind of led you to a different path? Is it 10 by 10 has been influential? Have there been other life? Is it the change in society, challenges we face around equity, environment, social cohesion? Or there's some more micro stuff that's happened in your life to be a little bit more purpose driven, not just focused on amazing investment career?
Well, I'd say there's two things. I mean, I think I was fortunate to spend many years living in London, New York, and living right at the height of the financial markets and interacting with people that were very powerful and wealthy and had huge positions of influence in those markets. And when I lived in London, when I lived in New York, when I went to meetings in Wall Street and I met a lot of these people, I didn't see a sense of great fulfillment, right? I saw rather a great sense of continually trying to a deep sense of competitiveness, which is okay, that's kind of fine. But then also you're this hamster wheel effect that I felt a lot of people that are forced into that type of, work and life and status seeking is about. And then I didn't think that led to a sense of living a fulfilling life. And then on the other hand, having seen, the impact we've been able to drive and the organizations we've been able to back and the stories of the people that we've been able to help and the contribution that I've been able to make through doing this other work, it just felt so much more enriching, right? And so I think that sort of real experiences, on the one hand, seeing what success, I think in many respects looked like in high finance, and then on the other side, seeing what success looks like in terms of impact. And it was just also a question of redefining what success means. I was talking to my partner about this over the weekend. It's I think our society still celebrates people and it's oh, that person's done really well. And generally we mean that they've made a lot of money. It's about redefining what success means into yourself. And if the impact you've been for yourself and if your impact you've been able to make is meaningful in society, then that's success. And so I feel very fortunate to have been able to do this work and to have a whole community of people around me that value it. And it feels like a life well lived.
Yeah. And looking at your younger self, way back, was there any hints that you might take this direction? Like what would they just how they described you at school, like your other students?
Well, I was never like I was a reasonable student, never, not particularly great, but my mum always felt that I didn't work hard enough. And I liked, drama and the arts and English. And so I was always, happy on a stage, if I'm honest. And so I think like to some extent people wouldn't be surprised that I've, gone on to do something that's like sort of got a bit of profile and engaging, and I've been able to leverage that skill set to engage and inspire hopefully other people to, get involved in purpose. But no, I mean, I think like I come from a Jewish family where the Jewish values are very intrinsic in the way in which we live. My father was always very committed, and my mother was also our community. And I think those values were instilled in me. And so, the fact that I've chosen to live this life contributing back to community in that sense isn't a surprise, because it's a function of, the upbringing I had and the values that were instilled in me. But yeah, it's like a slightly different path. But, I think I wanted to be an actor, I think, when I was like 18. So I think, I'm not sure this is, I think this is probably arguably a better contribution to society. But yeah, I think that's probably what I'd say. It's just sort of a function of the values upbringing, and then, being able to use whatever skills that I've been blessed with to try and make a contribution back has been the only indicator, I think, in that sense.
Yeah. And you've been employed, and you're also now an entrepreneur, and you would describe 10 by 10 as entrepreneurial, absolutely. And having an idea, bringing it to life, taking other people on a journey. Like, what were some of the toughest challenges in this, being an entrepreneur for you? Like, has that been an easy transition? Does it make you feel more alive? Like, what's entrepreneur mean to you?
Yeah, I think the hustle's real, right, in this space as a social entrepreneur. And I think that the challenges we face in social entrepreneurship are arguably, somewhat greater than financial entrepreneurship, because the financing and the value that, again, like going back to that concept of what's valued in society, I think if you're an early stage, company, you've got this whole venture capital community that will support you arguably and fund your company. Whereas if you're a social startup, it's much harder to raise the capital, I think, from the funding to help you grow. And so I think that barrier and that challenge is very significant. So 10 by 10 has a unique operating model where it's leveraging volunteers to go out and create the impact. And that's how we've been able to manage that structure. But again, motivating teams, it's everyone that listens to this podcast know that deals with volunteers, motivating teams of volunteers to execute your strategy is very difficult, right? So that's a definite challenge, right? Raising capital, motivating volunteers. And then I think this personal piece of just having knowing that the path you're on is the right path, and finding that depth of resilience to hang in there and stay the course. So many times through this journey, I was and it's I'm sure you hear this with entrepreneurs, but it's so true. It's I was borderline, not gonna do it. I remember just thinking of just pulling the pin so many times on this whole community capital thing. I was is it even worth it? Why am I putting myself through this? It was 2 years of pure hustle. But the thing I'd say, Longy, the only real quality that I think that I've got that's really differentiated is that ability just to persevere and hang around, not give up, just hang in there, persevere, don't give up. And if you see that vision and it's strong and you believe in your ability to get there, you can achieve it. Just last week, we had the launch event in Sydney. And I remember so many times on the journey, just creating that vision of what the launch event would be. How would I create it? Who would be there and speak? Who would come? What would this look like? And what would the article that announced the fund look like in the Fin Review? All these ideas, these visions that I had, I think they helped me actually get there, because there were so many times on that course where I was I'm done with this, it's over.
What were the main barriers that were people putting in front of you? What were they saying to you?
Oh, I mean, doing something like this, obviously there's a lot of political considerations that need to come into play, securing that level of commitment, and doing it from the top, no one's ever really spun out of Sun Super or Q Super before to create a fund. So I think that, getting the organization to believe that this was something that it wanted to support was obviously a huge challenge. So people talk about entrepreneurship, that's creating change from within organizations. That's very hard as well. When you're in a large established organization, you have to build a coalition of the willing. You have to take so many people on the journey. You have to get so many people in positions of power and leadership to believe in what you're doing. That was a huge task, of just getting everyone internally, when I was there, to believe in what we were, what we were trying to build here. So I think that was a real challenge. And then On the other side, it was interesting. Like ART sort of said to me, well, like, we'll put the first 100 million in, but you've got to go get another 100 mil at least. Otherwise, we're not doing it. Right.
Yeah.
And then I had like 3 months to raise the money, and I'd never raised any money before. Like, I've raised like, money for 10 by 10, but I'd never gone and raised like $100 million. Like, I didn't know how that was going to go.
Yeah.
And that was a huge challenge in terms of like raising that amount of money in that time frame in a very difficult capital raising market. But I think the power of what we're doing really resonated with the audience of the people that we were working with. And if I may, can I just tell a quick story about the fundraising piece? Because I think it's a really cool story that will resonate with your listeners.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So ART had said to me, like, this seed investor said, look, we'll put the first 100 in, but you need to go raise another 100, 150. And that had a small amount of time in which to do that. And I had gone to a number of other super funds to speak with them. And I had one investor who had said, look, I think we're good for a number here, and made this commitment. And I'd known the gentleman who was, the senior portfolio manager there and decision maker in the fund for a number of years. So I felt confident that, that they were going to come into the close. Like, in all these things, you're at the whim of financial markets, and the markets had sold off equities, which meant that his asset class had gone overweight. So he rang me one day, I think it was like in September, and said, hey, mate, I'm sorry, we don't have any more money. We can't allocate to the fund. And I was like, devastated. Like, I was so emotionally tied to all the wins and losses at this point that I was like, it was like really hit me. I remember like just being at home, like just so like, just hit me in like really in the guts. I was like, so anybody said, look, there's another pot of money we have in the fund. I don't manage it. Another guy manages in our team. You've got to come in and repitch it to him, and then maybe like you could get an allocation from there. So I said, okay. So I went and I got Michael from Barrenjoey with me, and we went back in and we repitched the fund. And I'm pitching the fund to this gentleman long enough, and the meeting was going terribly. Like, he's staring out of the window, he's not engaged. It was like I was getting no vibes. It was a disaster. But I'm like, we're getting no money here. So. And then he says to me at the end of the meeting, as we're wrapping towards the end, he says, so where's the money going? And I said, sorry. He goes, where's the money going? I said, the grants. Where are grants going? He goes, yeah, where are they going? And I normally give the example of an organization, that 10 by 10s work with, called Streetside Medics, which some people in Australia may be familiar with. They're a medical outreach service that work with people experiencing homelessness, that man vans with medical doctors and work night shifts or through the evenings in areas where people are experiencing homelessness, and provide a medical outreach program to people experiencing homelessness. And they were founded by Dr. Daniel Noor, who's the former Young Australian of the Year, amazing organisation that we've worked with, that we've been considering funding. But for whatever reason, in this meeting, I didn't give that example. I gave another example. And my rabbi tells me, by the way, that this was divinely inspired, that I gave another example. I'm not sure about it, but anyway, we'll give him the credit, maybe the benefit of the doubt there. And he said, so I gave another example. And the example I gave was of an organisation called Fighting Chance, who you may be aware of, that take people right across the disability spectrum and place them into meaningful work, employment opportunities. We funded Fighting Chance in 2014. They've gone on to become incredibly successful. And so as I'm telling the story of Fighting Chance, it's a gentleman who I'm pitching to, his whole demeanor in the meeting changes.
Yeah.
He starts nodding. He's like engaged in the meeting, connecting. And he says to me, this is a stitch up, right? And I said, sorry. He goes, this is a stitch up. And I said, sorry. He goes, you must have known. I said, what did I know? He said, well, you must have known that my wife and I have a daughter. We send her to Fighting Chance. I think she has I think that she has Down syndrome, but that Fighting Chance has changed our family's life.
Wow. And
Michael from Barrenjoey goes to me, mate, you're the best sales guy I've ever seen. Right. But it was like, obviously I had no idea, right, of this story, but this is the impact that we're creating, right? It's like that when your impact is wide ranging, you're touching people's lives in various parts of society, and this is the impact you're creating. These are the kind of things that happen. That's the magic of doing this type of work. And so the investor came in.
Serendipity in that movement.
Yeah. And they invested.
Totally.
So that's just a cool story of huge challenge, but then, these amazing moments come up like that. And that makes you feel like it's all worth it, right? And so the investor ended up coming to the fund, and they're part of the fund now. And so we got through that challenge as well.
And the highs and lows of, you said, you're really living the highs and the lows, and you're connected to the ups and the downs. Like, that's probably the biggest transformation in your new world. Like, being you've got Barrenjoey as a partner, but you're really feeling it, right? Suddenly, what matters, every decision made by everyone makes a huge difference about you get this over the line or get this launched or not.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Just because I know also like the impact this funding is going to make, right? Like, it's like we're talking of a grant pool of $15 to $25 million over the life of the fund. the impact that that's going to be able to make on people's lives is so significant. So the stakes are high, and I feel a sense of responsibility for helping drive those outcomes. And so when things happen inevitably that aren't great, it affects me. I'm I've been working with a coach through this whole process. In fact, the cool story about my coach is he fired me once I launched the fund. He's like, "We're done. You raised the fund. You're done now."
Yeah.
But which is cool. Right? It's clearly a good coach. But but dealing with that has been really hard, right? It's those highs and lows, and being able to just deal with those challenges, overcome them, and then also celebrate the wins when they occur. It's it's super important. But I think having someone objective, working with my coach, I'll give a shout out to him, Mark Powell, amazing guy, and he really helped me deal with the vicissitudes of this whole process. And I think that's been a key learning for me, and I think something that I've grown from.
Yeah, how has it changed you?
Well, I just think having the ability to step outside of what you're experiencing in those moments, in the wins and the losses, in the ups and the downs, and having the ability to look back on it objectively is probably is something that's shifted for me. I've been able to perhaps become a little better at taking myself out of the emotion or response to whatever situation and look at it from outside looking in. And I think creating that space through working with someone external has helped me in that sense. And so I'd like to think that I've gotten a little bit better at it. But my partner in this at Barrenjoey sort of still says to me that I'm very emotionally attached to the outcomes. But I think I'd like to think that I've, through the last year or two doing this, become a little more mature in how I handle and respond to things that go either right or wrong.
Yeah. And trust is so important when it comes to investment. And when you look at sort of your journey with 10 by 10 philanthropy, do you think starting the fund would have been possible, community capital, without that 10 by 10 philanthropy experience? How much of the two things work together in terms of people trusting you?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Obviously one born the other. I've got 10 years experience in having built a social purpose organization at 10 by 10 that's delivering these outcomes. So I think in the eyes of the investors, I had credibility, right? This is a guy who's not doing it because he's trying to get rich. He's doing it because he's deeply committed to the sector. And obviously for 10 years at 10 by 10, I did that purely on a voluntary basis. I've been the chairman of 10 by 10 for the last 10 years. And the intention is that, and my contribution there was always completely voluntary. And so I think through that contribution, I was able to build credibility in the work that I've been able to do and what I've been able to support. And that, in the eyes of the investors, I think brought some credibility to what I'm doing next. But just important to say on community capital, it's not me that's selecting organizations to whom we grant. We've also put in place an independent selection committee of some of the country's leading experts in grant making. So on that selection committee, I have the chair is Amanda Miller, who's the chair of co-chair of Philanthropy Australia, Abhilash Mudalaya from Paul Ramsey Foundation, Sky Hella from Minderoo, who are also a large investor in the fund. I have Daniel Petrie, who's obviously founded Airtree and worked with Bill Gates for many years at the Gates Foundation, and David Williams, who's former head of venture philanthropy at Social Ventures Australia. So I've really assembled a great group of people that can help, opine on the grant making piece of the fund to ensure that it had that independent governance, which I think is also important in the eyes of the investors. So it's not about me, it's about the systems, process, structure, and impact the fund's able to make.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you look back at, all those Saturday nights that you've been going to this 10 by 10 philanthropy events, or, convincing those volunteers, doing the extra side hustle stuff that you had to do to get off the ground, when you look back then and sort of, it could have been easier just go to a bar or, engage with other fund manager type stuff, and you didn't, and you persevered. You had this vision. You delivered these, millions of dollars to good causes. How much of it was kind of visionary about the future, and how much of it was just going along for the ride? When you look back and reflect about all those times when you could have been doing something else, how much of it was intentional, or you just went on a ride?
Yeah, no, I think you talk about the opportunity cost. I think there's an opportunity cost there, but I don't think the opportunity cost was ever social, because I'd always rather go out and talk to 10 by 10 committee members or go to and engage in conversations that have got meaning and purpose than like do other things socially that maybe aren't as like, interesting. So I'm very much engaged and love being engaged in conversations about this work. So and hopefully, I've been able to also choose friends and people, that in my life that share those values. But the opportunity cost, I would say, was more like professional in that, because I was building 10 by 10 with the support of the board and the executive, over that period, I'd say there was a professional opportunity cost that I wasn't optimizing my career at that point to the extent that I could have. But then if you look at it now, it's like come totally full circle, right? It was like, that was the best decision ever, because doing that work for 10 years enabled me now to come into a position where I've set up a, asset management company that's going to, over its life, like contribute back. If we just do one fund and we're done, 15 to 25 million, you could probably sense with me, like I'm not like that would, we've got big grander ambitions than that, right? So hopefully over the life of this business, we're able to make contribution of, in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars back into community. And that was possible because of, those sacrifices that I did make. But at the time, I probably didn't see them, right? I was just I was conscious of the sacrifice. I just did it because it felt right. But I didn't have this end goal inside. Like the idea for community capital and the genesis of it only happened really during the depths of COVID, after I was originally supposed to be moving to New York to open the investment office for Sun Super. That was off the table. I was having this there's the depths of COVID. I was in lockdown, and I was thinking, well, what could I do next? And that was where the genesis of the idea came from. So it was never I didn't have this 10-year plan. It just kind of evolved. But the ability of the sacrifices that I made at 10 by 10 enabled, I think, this vision to come to life. And for me now to be in this amazing position that I'm in, to be able to do both.
And I know it's not about you and it's about others and what you leave behind, but it must have been nice to be recognised for your services, by the Australian government.
Yeah, no, amazing. Yeah, I received the Order of Australia medal last year. Was a great honour, and one that I never expected I would achieve, in my lifetime, let alone so early. It was funny when I went into the ceremony with my mum and dad. We walked in, and then the attaché to the governor showed my dad into the room where where they get the medal, and my dad's like, no, he didn't get it. I didn't get it. It was him, and he points to me because I was by far the youngest person there by a few years.
Yeah.
So it wasn't lost on me. But so that was a great honour. But the one thing I'd share with you from that ceremony, which really stuck with me, was, you sit at the back of the room and there's this whole procession of all these people in society have done, honestly, far more than me, incredible stories. There are people that day that dedicated their entire lives to, to community and service. So it was really inspiring to just be in the room and hear of the contributions of so many to Australian society. But as I approached the governor, I just sort of was expecting, to receive the pin, that she would just sort of shake my hand and post the photo, go on the mantelpiece, and that would be it. But she stops and she looks at me and she says, Laurence, it's incredible what the power of a single idea can do to transform the world. And I think that's what really resonated with me. And I think what's really been incredible, and that hopefully maybe that your listeners can take away, that the spark of an idea can then create the momentum to live a life of service to community and society. And that I never intended this to be, my path. It unraveled and unfolded as a result of one good idea that I think I had, and the ability to inspire and work with incredible people around me to be able to drive my life to now do this work and hopefully make an even greater contribution over the next stages of my life and through the work we're able to do at Community Capital and with 10 by 10 as well. So yeah.
And do you think the extensions of that, two things that come to my mind is one is serve others. Whatever you do, serve others, and then keep turning up. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep focused on being there and existing and following your mission.
That's it. I think if you've got that sense of purpose and that drive, and you have the strong sense of the contribution you want to make, that should be the focus of your energies. And know there'll be ups and downs, and just hang in there, because that's, as I said, the only quality that I think I really have is dogged determination and a will to succeed. And that's the only thing that I think has enabled me to sustain this path. And I think in this sector, it's harder than in other sectors, right? Because we don't, we're not blessed with, because of the huge financial challenges that we have in terms of some sections of society don't see the financial value of what we're achieving. The barriers are often harder. And I think that the will to what can sustain us in doing this work in this field is the passion for the impact that we're able to create, and know that when we live our lives in alignment with these values, that they're ultimately richer and will reflect back on our lives with a strong sense of fulfillment at the contribution we've been able to make.
Yeah. And just looking to close, and you're back, you're having a catch up with your old colleagues and connecting, and they're asking you how it's going. And are you sort of, the investment guys forever changed? Like, are you a different kind of investment professional with a different outlook compared to them? And are you having to sort of try and swing them in a certain direction? Like, are you sort of evangelical about your new for-purpose investment world?
No, I think not at all, because I think like a lot of people that work in the superannuation sector and work within superannuation funds, do it, they don't earn tons of money, not like working in a hedge fund or a private equity fund, right? Like, they're working in that environment. And their returns are all going to make their members' lives better. So I think a lot of people that work in superannuation fund sector do it because they have a strong sense of purpose. So I wouldn't as well, right? They just do it in a slightly different way. And everyone finds their way or their definition of how to make an impact and their role within a broader society. And I respect the approach that many of my colleagues have taken. And I feel so grateful to have worked at Sun Super, then Australian Retirement Trust, because of the huge values alignment that I found there from the leadership team right down to everyone that I worked with. So I don't think that, and I would never want to appear as evangelical, because there's another part of this I think that's very important, right? That I'm also able to operate in this sphere, in the institutional fund market, with institutional investors, super funds, large asset managers, and my ability for them to see me as an equal and for them to see me as genuinely driving best financial outcomes is also really important. And so I wouldn't want anyone to perceive me as being different, right? Like, I'm just someone that's able to interact between both worlds and try and find a way to leverage my skills and my networks in the financial services sector to create a strong impact. And so I just want everyone to see me exactly just as another guy that's working in finance, just doing it in a slightly different way.
Laurence Marshbaum, massive thank you for joining me on Purposely.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Purposely Podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review. I hope you like what you're hearing, because I sure do.